Hello and welcome to TechFunnel.com's interview series. My name is Danny White, and today we have the opportunity to talk to Jason Lauritsen. Jason is a keynote speaker, author, and consultant. He is an employee engagement and workplace culture expert who will challenge you to think differently. A former corporate human resources executive, Jason has dedicated his career to helping leaders build organizations that are good for both people and profits. He also led the research team for Quantum Workplace's Best Places to Work program, where he has studied the employee experience at thousands of companies to understand what the best workplaces in the world do differently than the rest. Jason is the author of the book Unlocking High Performance: How to Use Performance Management to Engage and Empower Employees to Reach Their Full Potential, and co-author of Social Gravity: Harnessing the Natural Laws of Relationships. Welcome, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So let's get right into it. How do you define employee engagement?
That is a great question. Thank you for starting with that, because one of my pet peeves about the work of employee engagement is that we often just sort of assume that everybody understands what it is or what it means. And so Absolutely. Thank you for starting with that. The way that I define it is, I believe that employee engagement is the degree to which an employee is both willing and able to perform to their potential. Mm-hmm. And so that definition to me is really important, and it's been something that sort of emerged or evolved out of my work over the last probably 20 years. Mm-hmm. I think the three things about that are really important. Number one is that employee engagement is fundamentally about performance. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes we forget this. We get wrapped up in thinking that engagement's about, creating fun at work or making people happy, or, it sort of feels, I think sometimes to leaders like a kumbaya thing. And it's right. And the reality is, like, it is about happiness and fun and all of those things, but those things are levers, or they are components that help create an experience that allows the employee to perform at their best, right? To give their best. And the work of engagement is really about creating an environment that where an experience in an environment where the employee sort of willingly gives their talents and passions to the organization. Mm-hmm. But it also implies that they are able, right? That we support people in being their best. And that can be things like even well-being, how do they feel? Are we supporting them as human beings? Do they have the tools they need? Is the environment healthy? All of those things go into it. So short definition, but there's a lot packed into that.
Definitely. So there's this all-encompassing idea of employee engagement. What do you think are the top three things that organizations should do to drive engagement among their employees?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a common question, right? Because we always want to cut down to the, what are the three things? Give me the three things I can start on. So I would say, the advice that I often give, and you ask for three, there's sort of one thing that I start with for every organization, and that is if your organization is not requiring and supporting regular structured one-on-one meetings between managers and employees that are happening at least monthly, and I don't care what kind of business you're in, but like a one-on-one sit down between the manager and the employee, if that's not happening, that's where you start, right? Mm-hmm. That alone will increase engagement. It will increase loyalty. It'll increase performance. It'll do a lot of different things. And you don't have to get those one-on-ones perfectly. You just start doing that. So I think that's probably the most powerful tool that we have in our toolkit. Mm-hmm. And so that's usually that's the go-to, right? On number one. I think the second and third things are related to that is do a lot more, from a management. So if I think about this from a management perspective or from a leadership perspective, how do you increase engagement? It's from a manager and leader perspective is ask more questions and listen more.
Okay.
Right? talk to employees, ask them how things are going, ask them about their experience, ask them what they see going on in the business, ask how you could improve the business, ask how you can be better as a manager, and then listen and learn from that. Probably those things together, and they're combined. That's what a one-on-one really should be about. But if you did those two things, I would say that would really help. And then the third thing is create some social space within your organization for employees to build relationship, to get connected to one another, to build friendships. We've had this kind of trend over the last 20 plus years in our organizations towards maximum efficiency. We've been trying to sort of squeeze our organization for the maximum efficiency. And as a result, we've taken out a lot of the social space where people would make friends and get connected to the people around them. And what we found is in fact, I did some research. You mentioned Quantum Workplace. When I was there, we did a research project where we actually collected responses from 14,000 different employees. We asked them what was the single thing other than pay and benefits, right? If we take, obviously people want pay and benefits, but what's a single thing other than that makes a place a great place to work? And the number one response, far and away, mentioned 2.5 times more often than any other response, was the people that I work with, right? The relationships I have, right? So if you want to create an engaged workplace, you have to allow people to build healthy relationships with the people around them.
Absolutely. So in your book, Unlocking High Performance, you talk about how work has really fundamentally shifted from this contractual agreement to more of a relationship-focused agreement, talking about relationships in your last answer. How critical is that for employers to understand the relationship building aspect, so that we don't just sign on the dotted line, but it's like a process that we go through?
Yeah, it's incredibly critical if you want an environment at work where people feel fully engaged, where you're getting the best performance or the best contribution possible out of people. So I would say that the model, in order to get there, you have to make that shift. I don't think most organizations have shifted yet out of the contractual model. I think our thinking needs to evolve. I think there's a greater awareness, but most organizations still treat work like it's a contract with the employee, right? As an employer, we offer up pay and benefits and a place to work and all of those things, safe work environment in exchange for the employee's contributions and time. It's sort of viewed as a contractual exchange. And most of our processes, and I think this is really why engagement, when Gallup measures it across the US, or across the world, they come back and say that a majority of people are disengaged. It's because their employer is treating them like they're in a contract. Like performance appraisals are all about, like, did you do what we, contracted to do, right? And so that's what job descriptions and policy manuals and performance improvement plans are all about. And so the shift towards treating it like a relationship is really more. It's not about having less structure. It's not about managing less. It's not about less accountability. It's about recognizing that employees, and I think there's decades of data that suggest this, that employees, when they show up to work, we experience work as employees more as a relationship. And that's why engagement research will tell us that the things that drive engagement are things like feeling valued or appreciated or cared for or trusted. Like those are all relational constructs. It doesn't sound like a contract. That sounds like a relationship. And so we have to start thinking differently about work and creating the work experience that feels more like a relationship for employees. And that starts with managers.
Absolutely. So it seems like communication is one of the biggest skills that are underutilized when trying to build that culture of engagement, not communicating very well from the employer side to the employee side of how engagement is to be done, and creating that space to do that, as you mentioned. What are some of the other skills that everyone really should be developing and paying attention to help foster that engaging culture?
So, one, I hesitate to almost mention this because I think it's almost becoming buzzword status, and I think it's getting overused. But I'll define what I mean when I say it. But I think one of the skills, especially from a manager or a leader perspective, is learning how to coach.
Okay.
And I think that is fundamentally about changing how we think about feedback and providing feedback and how we're exchanging information, feedback going both ways. And so the reason I use the word coach is that I love thinking about, my experience being coached, my experience coaching my kids or youth, my kid watching my kids being coached. I noticed that when you're being coached, when you're an athlete being coached, you are getting constant feedback. Right? Your coach is giving you constant feedback on how you're doing. They're helping you see where you can get better. I think the experience I continue to go back to is when I hired a golf coach a number of years ago, and I remember going to this lesson, and my coach standing behind me watching me swing a golf club, and he never criticized my swing. He never asked me about how I played in the past. There was no criticism involved at all. He would watch my swing and say, why don't you try this on your next swing? Like, he would offer me some idea on something I could do. So he was never criticizing. He was never telling me what I was doing wrong. He was helping me find what would help me reach better performance. And I think that's what the difference with coaching looks like. And so if I'm a manager, you definitely work on your communication, and principal among that is work on your listening skills. But then it's coaching, learning how to provide coaching towards better performance, providing suggestions, providing ideas instead of providing critical feedback. In my book, I talk about it as feed forward, sort of a model or different approach for helping your employees grow and develop and be better.
Awesome. Does high employee engagement correlate to high customer engagement, especially when you're in those customer-facing companies?
Yeah, there's a fair amount of research that suggests that it does, and I don't even think. I mean, you can go find it. Gallup has some research. There's a variety of organizations that have studied where, especially where, like in retail or restaurants, where the employee meets the customer, it stands to reason that if I feel invested in my work, right, if I'm giving my best and being my best, I'm going to create a better experience for you as my customer. Seems like a fairly obvious thing. There's some pretty substantial research that suggests that. So it translates, there is a fairly straight, Gallup's been telling us that for years in their kind of value chain.
Right, absolutely.
I don't think you have to, I don't even think you need a ton of data to really understand that, like, listen, when I feel better about my work and about my job and about how I'm being treated, I'm going to treat you better.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So final question, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned in working with companies on this topic? Has there been like one overarching theme or lesson that you've come across? Because you've worked with thousands of companies on this.
Yeah. I think that probably the biggest lesson is that it's a lot, going back to the sports analogy, I think engagement is, I'm going to give you two lessons. Engagement's a lot like sports in the sense that the fundamentals are generally what are most important, right? The basics of communication and listening and building connection and seeing people and just expressing appreciation, right? The fundamentals are the things that matter often the most. And so fundamentals matter greatly. The other lesson is sort of what my book is about that you mentioned earlier, and that's that our entire model of work is built around this idea of work as a contract, whereas employees experience work as a relationship. And I think fundamentally the work is, shifting how we approach work and how we approach employees to make them feel like they are in a healthy relationship with their employment, with their employer, as opposed to showing up every day and be treated like they're, sort of what have you done for me lately contractual approach.
Absolutely. So you've written one book and co-authored another one. Do you have any more books along the same line coming down the pipe?
Well, not yet. I don't have any other. My newest book published in October, so we're still in the midst of trying to get that one, spread the word and evangelize that.
Okay.
That said, I do a ton of writing at my blog at jasonlauritsen.com. So if people want to get sort of bite-sized advice, stopping by the blog, signing up for our newsletter is a great way to get kind of little nudges towards this kind of stuff. If you like my brand of employee engagement craziness, then that's where you find some more.
Absolutely. The Unlocking High Performance book is very good. Haven't read the second one yet, but I'll get on that one. Thank you so much, Jason, for joining us and for sharing your insights. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Guys, thanks for listening to this interview. For these and other interviews and topics, you can connect with us on techfunnel.com or across social, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Thank you.